Good afternoon to you all. My name is Jerry Power, and I am the National Head of Sales for Emergence, and I will be your host for today's webinar. The webinar series is an ongoing feature of our education initiative to build the cyber knowledge of our broker partners and their clients. As usual, we have a big audience of brokers and clients listening today, which gives you an insight into how many of you are interested in building your knowledge on cyber. I'm pleased to advise all attendees today will be entitled to 1 CPD point for attending today's webinar. As many of you would know, cyber issues are one of the most topical issues within the insurance industry today. A good reason to be interested is, according to the Minister for Cybersecurity, Angus Taylor, online payments fraud in Australia or against Australians is a serious issue. Online fraud has been climbing steadily for years and is now nudging 500 million a year in Australia alone. Today, we would like to share with you our insights into the results from the latest report into the Notifiable Data Breaches Scheme, which came out recently, the importance of managing the brand damage that occurs when you tell your customers you are responsible for their personal information being in the hands of criminals. We will case study one of Emergence's recent claims, which attracted a lot of media attention and forced the CEO into the television and social media limelight. We will be showcasing what we call Emergence 3.0, which includes Emergence new cyber wording, which was released yesterday. The wording has been upgraded to reflect the developments in cyber exposures. And finally, I will walk you through enhancements we've made to the Emergence portal, which increases the options available to you to tailor cyber programs to your clients' needs. We plan this webinar to go for 50 minutes with an additional 10 minutes for Q&A. Our promise to you is we will wrap this up within an hour so you can get back to your businesses. If you want to post a question during the webinar, please use the question icon on your screen and we will try and answer as many questions as possible in the Q&A session or before. As a thank you to all of you who have joined the webinar today, we are running a competition to win a fantastic Google Home for any of you who follow us on LinkedIn between now and next Tuesday, and I'll provide you with more details later. So as you can see, we've got plenty to share with you today. As usual, if you've got no idea what I'm saying, just follow the slides. Now, I need to warn you, your feedback from previous webinars has forced Emergence to do something you might regret. You have asked us for a picture of each speaker in the webinar. If you don't want to be damaged for life, please look away now. I told you, it's shocking. I did warn you. So as you all know, the Notifiable Data Breaches Scheme came into effect in February of this year. Recently, the Privacy Commissioner released their second report into the scheme. Importantly, this was the first full quarter of reporting under the scheme. The report highlighted what Emergence expected, which was an explosion in data breaches being notified to the Commissioner. Bear in mind, what is being reported is only those data breaches that companies have chosen to report. It does not deal with the issue that we believe is lurking in the business community, which is rampant data breaches that are still being hidden from customers and the public. The latest report shows us that there were 242 data breaches notified in the last 3 months alone. And the two key drivers of data breaches were human error and criminal attacks. Putting this figure of 242 notifications in context, for the 12 months prior to the NDB scheme, there were only 114 notifications in total. You can see from the chart, the number of data breaches is increasing every month. At Emergence, we believe this trend is only going to increase as the awareness of the NDB scheme escalates in the business community and the general public. The more data breaches are highlighted in mainstream media, and the increased understanding that directors can be potentially liable for data breaches, and the failure of management to have appropriate security posture and risk management practices in place to protect individuals' personal information. So what information is being stolen? Contact information such as name, address, and emails are by far what is being compromised. Of more concern is that 42% of data stolen is bank account and credit card details. From a cyber insurance perspective, this can be managed in a couple of ways. Either it is covered under the cyber theft cover, or if the affected individual gets their bank account cleaned out, it could trigger litigation against your client, as the proximate cause of the financial loss is the negligence of your client to have adequate security controls in place to prevent the theft. A key point I see in this collection of information stolen is that you have all the attributes for identity theft. And if you don't like somebody, steal their identity. It's a hideous crime. As I mentioned before, the two main sources of data loss are malicious or criminal attack and human error. The malicious attacks have spiked since the first report, with such attacks increasing from 45 to 59%. These attacks generally involve phishing, malware, and ransomware attacks. At Emergence, the most common vector dealt with by our incident response team is ransomware attacks. What I prefer to concentrate on today, though, is the issue of the human error factor. As humans, we have that great skill of finding new ways to make mistakes. The latest report shows us that employee mistakes are seen in over a third of data breaches. The thing that frustrates me about this statistic is that it is an issue that is within our control as businesses. If we have proper policies and procedures in place through a risk management process, a large amount of these data breaches could be prevented. Employers need to understand that when the security controls fail to stop an attack, such as a phishing campaign, it is the employees who are the last line of defense. It is the staff who need to be educated to identify a dodgy email or a suspicious invoice. The latest report also shows that some employees are just not paying attention, whether it's emails or mail sent to the wrong person, or staff CCing the entire world instead of blind copying them. The other interesting insight provided by the new quarterly report is the industries impacted by data breaches. For the second report in a row, the healthcare industry proves to be the industry that is the worst performer for keeping data secure. This is probably why a number of insurers in the market won't even write this industry. One of the reasons for this is, I think, the lack of investment in data security. One of the reasons being, if you ask a hospital if they're going to allocate funding to the emergency ward or some security system, it's a no-brainer what the answer is going to be. Another reason is because medical data is approximately 9 times more valuable in the dark web compared to credit card data. As expected, in the healthcare industry, human error is the biggest vector, with nearly 60% of all data breaches caused by human error. The experience shows sending emails to the wrong person, losing USB devices, and unauthorized access to patient records are the main reasons for the data loss. So as you can see, the new NDB scheme is having a material impact on the disclosure of data breaches. It is obvious that as awareness of the NDB scheme continues and data breaches continue being topical news on mainstream media and in social media, the need to manage data breaches becomes critical to the survival of business. Jeff Foulstone will later walk you through the implications of failing to manage data breaches correctly and how the brand of a company can be destroyed by failing to deal with the consequences of a data breach. From a broker's perspective, look at the industries your clients are operating in and consider whether you need to have a cyber conversation with them. The reality is, if staff are the last line of defense, mistakes and data breaches will continue. Educate your clients on the importance of staff education and how cyber aware staff can materially reduce the impact for cyber breaches. Now that you've got a better understanding of what data breaches are occurring, let's talk about the impact of a data breach having on a business. Today, we're delighted to have Jeff Foulstone, CEO of Foulstone Communications. Jeff is a highly experienced communications professional working with organizations to enhance their engagement with media, customers, and investors. With more than 25 years' experience, Jeff is a highly sought-after advisor, having advised directors and chief executives from some of Australia's largest listed companies to a broad group of mid-market companies. His work frequently focuses on highly complex communication challenges requiring careful management of diverse stakeholder needs, often on a global scale. As a seasoned crisis expert, Jeff is a regular conference speaker, commentator, and writer on crisis management. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks very much, Jerry, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to talk this afternoon. I'm going to spend the next 15 to 20 minutes looking in detail at what it looks like at the coalface when a cyber crisis hits, what the impacts are, what the typical phases are, and some practical steps that are possible to actually mitigate the impacts. Let's start with cybersecurity by the numbers. The reality is the risks are very, very real and the costs are very, very high. The data is overwhelming. As Jerry's charts show, the problem just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. 500,000 small businesses in 2017 alone were victims of cybercrime. That's just small businesses. This is a problem that can happen to you and it can happen to the clients you're dealing with. It's a day-to-day reality and most people accept it's a matter not of if we are subject to an attack, but when. Not only are the impacts vast, but it's expensive. One metric alone here that comes out of the latest OAIC survey, the average cost per record breached was $139 per record. In that survey, the range of volume of data breaches was between 2,700 and 69,835. Let's put that in context. The smallest breach in this survey, 2,700 records, cost approximately $375,000. As the size of the breach goes up, obviously those numbers can increase astronomically. So this is a real problem. These are real risks, and the impacts and the costs are very, very high. Let me walk through now the key phases of a cyber breach. I tend to like the imagery of a pendulum to think through a cyber breach. It's got a downward trajectory as the problems emerge, as publics become available, as media becomes available, it hits the bottom of the pendulum. But if you act appropriately during the crisis, if you have a plan to deal with it before the crisis, you come up the other side rapidly. So the key phases as outlined on this chart. Firstly, the preparation phase. The harsh reality today is that speed kills. Speed is critical, as outlined in this quote by IBM. We are now in an age where every single consumer is empowered. Every single consumer has in their back pocket or their purse enough weaponry to unleash social media oblivion on your brand. It doesn't matter the size of the organisation. It doesn't matter the existing social media profile. Customers taking to forums with all the power of an iPhone is what it takes. So the need to prepare is absolutely central because social media proliferates so quickly. You do not have time, you do not have the luxury of time to spend planning when this happens to you. The respond phase. One of the interesting observations we have in having managed a number of cyber attacks is it's often a considerable amount of time before companies are aware that they have actually been breached. And in some cases, a matter of months. This puts you really behind the eight ball in terms of being able to get on the front foot with customers and other impacted stakeholders and communicate in a timely fashion. Turning to the repair phase, there's a famous quote that many of us would be familiar with from Warren Buffett. And Buffett said famously, it takes 15 years to build a reputation and 15 minutes to lose it. I'd like to put to you that in the age of cyber breaches, it takes 15 seconds to lose it, not 15 minutes. The imperative to be able to respond rapidly is extraordinary. I'd now like to just probe in a little bit more depth one of the issues that's dear to the hearts and minds of a lot of small businesses, which is what we're going to do when social media goes toxic. Why you need to pay attention to social media. Here's some interesting data that's probably about 12 months old now, but it just shows the prevalence of online behaviour in the lives of ordinary Australians. It shows us that 79% of Australians access the internet daily. Half the population, more than 5 times a day. And the places they're going in particular are Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. So we're living in an extraordinarily connected society. Australians have a reputation of being early adopters of technology, and that's reflected in these statistics. So they're online frequently, and that is often where the problems arise when customers are aggrieved, when other stakeholders are aggrieved. As Amy Jo Martin has put pretty eloquently, social media is the ultimate equaliser. It gives a voice and it gives a platform to anyone willing to engage. So social media is something we have to pay close attention to. Here's a recent example of a data breach in Australia. This is the Family Planning New South Wales breach, which occurred in May this year. The top chart, the line graph, is the social media mentions over a period between early May and May 28th. May 14th, right in the middle of the bump, is when the breach was. So an organisation that had comparatively little traction in social media. And to put that in context, post-breach, so in the months of June and August combined, Family Planning New South Wales had a cumulative total over those 2 months of 50 mentions. In the middle of this breach, on one day, they had nearly 1,000, which is what that curve represents. So organisations that haven't had high social media profiles, that don't have well-developed platforms, can find themselves instantaneously under an absolute avalanche of social media. What's even more interesting about that is if you look at the bar chart at the bottom, which measures sentiment. So red being negative and green being positive. And as you can see, the overwhelming trend, as you would frankly expect in this sort of situation, but the overwhelming trend is highly, highly negative. So that's what it looks like when it happens. It comes fast and furious, and the volumes are far in excess of anything an organisation might have experienced before. Turning to the next slide, this is a heat map of all the word associations in the media around Family Planning New South Wales and the ransomware attack. The bigger the word in this chart, the more prominent it was. So this helicopter view shows very clearly how damaging the language, the narrative around this breach was. We see the words attack very prominently, breach, ransomware, compromised. This is what it looks like in the media when a breach is savage. And you can imagine the impact on all the eyeballs reading those words, forming views about the company, its brand, its trustworthiness, whether it's an organisation they would interact with. Turning to the next slide. This slide demonstrates how extensively traditional media is cross-pollinating with social media. So on the left, we see a range of online stories that ran during this period relating to the breach. On the right, in line with each story, is how that story was shared through social media. So the first column in the bubble charts is Facebook, for example. And so we see that not only does bad news travel fast in a digital world in terms of online publications, it's then shared massively through social media. So there's a multiplication effect that leads to the significant damage that we're talking about. So what can organisations do? What can they do specifically in the context of social media to make an impact? Well, the first thing is to have a platform to respond. You need to be able to have a forum to get your message out, to get the mitigating factors of the breach out, to be able to inject balance. We find it quite powerful in a situation like this to direct people to a single source of truth, a single location, almost inevitably the company's website, which has all the information relevant to the breach, to what people can do to understand if they've been breached, how the company is responding to repair whatever has been broken in terms of the technology, and where people can find out more. So to have a single source of truth, and we're finding it quite powerful to direct people from these social media platforms to a fixed website which houses all the information. The other significant planning fact in social media response is to focus very much on influencers. So in a situation like this, we're looking for the posters in Facebook or Twitter or wherever they're posting who have the most followers and who are most frequently shared or retweeted. We're defining them as influencers, and they're the ones we pay particular attention to and seek to engage with directly through direct messaging, seeking them to take their conversations out of a social media context into a direct context. The final point, in terms of tips that can be followed, is to fight the fire where it's burning. So if, for example, the fire is in Twitter, we don't want to start a fire in Facebook. We want to deal with it in the forum where it's being challenged. The risks of being underprepared. When you have a breach, people look at you and your organisation through a different lens. Fundamentally, it boils down to the fact that trust is broken. Customers you might have had a solid long-term relationship, a positive relationship, all of a sudden look at you through jaundiced perspective. Partners the same, employees the same. There is a loss of trust. And so there are risks. There are risks, for example, to partners. There are threats to strategic relationships. As partners who might have their own brand, their own profile, don't want the risk of the mud sticking to your organisation, sticking to them. It puts strategic relationships under significant pressure. Regulatory scrutiny is another factor that comes much more into play in a context of a breach. We've heard Jerry talk about the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, but there are other regulators as well who are all highly motivated by consumer complaints. And so your business may have never had an interaction with a regulator in its history, and all of a sudden you have regulators crawling all over you. Employees. Employees are such a foundational part, obviously, of every organisation. They're also ambassadors in many cases for your brand. We've seen in organisations that have handled crisis situations badly, puts real pressure on things like staff retention, on staff motivation, and it's a significant risk in a cyber breach. Thirdly, media. Media obviously have the potential to throw enormous amounts of fire and fuel on a situation. A cyber breach has significant news value. So an organisation that might never have found itself in the media, might never have found itself of interest to the media, might become a centrepiece of a news story. That has obvious risks in terms of magnifying and dramatically escalating the awareness of the cyber breach. And finally on this list, customers. Reputation risk with customers. You breach trust with customers, and that's pretty much how they interpret a cyber breach, and it's very difficult to repair. So they're the risks, some of the risks of being underprepared for a cyber breach. What follows on this slide is some of our own proprietary research on consumers' views of a cyber breach. The left two circle charts are from that survey. The right is from the OAIC data. And we specifically wanted to look at one of the features of a lot of breaches. As I mentioned before, it takes sometimes a long time before an organisation is even aware they've been breached. There is a real temptation, especially where an organisation does not have a plan to respond, to sit on the information. And we suspect a huge number of organisations are actually sitting on breaches right now and they haven't told anybody. What this research shows is how people respond in that situation. Almost 90% are in the very negative or slightly negative camp. That's damage to your reputation. And there's a practical cost too. The right-hand bar chart, taken from the OAIC data, shows the costs of not having a plan and then delaying. There is a material difference in the cost where the containment period was under 30 days compared to where it was larger than 30 days. So not having a plan, not being prepared to respond, has significant real costs to an organisation. Finally, I'd like to turn to some of the success factors in a crisis. The chart on the right is again from the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner. All the lines on the right-hand side are positive impacts, that is, savings in terms of the overall cost of a breach. The very top one is something that every organisation can do, and that is have an incident response team and a plan in place. In fact, it's something that's part of the Emergence program. The other factors there are all obvious to all of us. So what else makes a difference in a crisis? Obviously, having a response plan in place is something I've highlighted several times. Because of the speed with which you need to react, you need to have a plan in place and you need to test it regularly. Secondly, given the prevalence of social media, as we've discussed, and the fact that social media is often the first early warning sign of a problem, companies need to have tools in place to listen to their social media, to be aware and alert early when customer complaints in, for example, Facebook forums spike all of a sudden. Thirdly, to have a rapid response capability, the ability to get on top of facts, to be able to prepare materials, and to be able to get ahead of the information avalanche. That's all part of a good crisis response plan as well. We're also finding that compared to the cost and the pain highlighted in the previous slide on delays, organisations who are prepared to be upfront with stakeholders, who are prepared to tell them exactly what's happened, exactly how it happened, exactly what they're doing to fix it and to repair it, what they can do to mitigate damage themselves, build trust. And it plays very well to be on the front foot. And finally, to acknowledge and accept responsibility where it exists and to make a genuine and authentic apology. Thanks for your time. I look forward to talking at questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's move on to solutions to manage the changing environment we are facing. Emergence are always looking how it can improve its offering and support the broker network. Yesterday, we released a new cyber wording and increased our underwriting capabilities. Helping us to get our heads around the new wording is our US legend, Jeff Gonlin, Head of Underwriting and Product Development for Emergence. Jeff is the architect of the new Emergence cyber wording. As you can see from Jeff's picture, Jeff has over 35 years of insurance and reinsurance experience, having worked for General Re in the US, Europe, and Australia. Before joining Emergence in 2016, Jeff was General Re's Regional Chief Underwriter for all casualty FAC program business across the Asia Pacific region. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Jerry. And thanks to Jeff for that presentation. Love working with Jeff. I think he's got some great words of wisdom here on the new world out there. I'm going to talk just briefly about our wording and how that's going to help you when you find yourself in those situations. You'll recall that in a previous webinar, we promised an update of our wording, and we gave you a bit of a sneak peek. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time or go into great detail today, but I do want to remind and refresh on a few key points and point to a couple other resources in the end. We've kept to our true to our core proposition, which is, cyber doesn't need to be complicated. It can be straightforward, flexible, and affordable. That's what we've always done here at Emergence, something that's easy to understand and to tailor to your client's needs. So times have changed. We've listened to the demands of the market. You'll find great flexibility, including some increased excess options up to $25,000 on the portal with some attractive discounts. And why not use that savings then to purchase some higher limits? You know, in the new NDB world, and given the cost that the clients face, you may be making a very good trade-off. We've got the various options: the cyber theft, tangible property, and contingent business interruption will be familiar to anyone that knows our product, and we've added joint venture and consortium coverage as well. We've expanded jurisdiction. We're offering not just greater flexibility, but and more cover, but we do it now in more countries. We'll touch on that a bit later. The minimum premium is still $400, and the minimum excess is $250. That's some phenomenal value, especially for the micro or the SME firm. You know, if you think you can't afford it, well, think again. You can get great protection at an affordable price with Emergence. We've got increased optional cover limits. Cyber theft has been very much in the news lately. We've expanded to provide up to $1 million for cyber theft coverage, $1 million for contingent business interruption, and $100,000 for tangible property damage to cover your IT infrastructure. Now, we heard Jeff Foulstone talk about the reputational damage and the loss of customer loyalty. You know, this is one of the most underestimated, something that has the greatest long-term impact on companies. I think studies have shown that it's been one of the great, what they call off-balance sheet effects. Well, you can insure yourself against it. We give you more protection for business interruption by providing 30 to 365 days for your indemnity period. On the other end, we've listened to your feedback. We've cut our waiting period in half from 24 to 12 hours. So you get real meaningful protection that you can flexibly tailor to your needs. We recognize, and we've clarified, that your IT infrastructure can be hosted anywhere. There's a lot of talk these days about migrating to clouds with expectations of enhanced security and reliability. There's less talk about the BYOD, or bring your own device. Now, the fact is, it's harder to secure those own devices. They're largely out of your IT department's control. Did you know phishing is 3 times more likely to succeed on phones and own devices than company computers? Well, whether it's cloud or bring your own device, rest easy with Emergence. Irrespective of where it's hosted, you got coverage. The jurisdictional coverage I mentioned earlier, we're looking at worldwide, ex-USA. That's not ex-US Canada, which many policies provide, but US, worldwide ex-US, with an option to cover the third-party claims and US jurisdiction for those who have that exposure. We've got a new feature that is pursuit costs, $50,000 for assistance if it leads to the arrest and conviction of the perpetrator. Anybody recall GoGet? You know, they do catch these guys. The pursuit cost is not available for law enforcement. That would probably constitute a bribe, I think, if you gave it to them, or your employees or IT contractors. But that is a new feature, and we hope to make use of that. The threats we're facing today are also broader. We've got a changing face here. It's not just ransomware, what Jerry mentioned, but we've seen cases now too where you have denial of service threats, where someone says, "Look, I'm not going to wipe out your data, but we can host a DOS or a DDoS against you. It's available for hire cheaply on the dark web. That sort of thing, the crisis management, the mitigation, that also gains coverage under our policy. Joint venture and consortiums, already mentioned, digital currency ransoms, whether it's Bitcoin or more likely Monero these days. That's clarification. We do extend to that. We've got enhanced multimedia liability coverage. Give it a read. I think you'll like it. It's as good as anybody's out there, I think. And finally, I'm not going to terrorize you any longer with the right back wording that we've had on the quotes. You won't see that on the quotes any longer because the 003 policy incorporates that into the body of the policy. So just to see how those stack up, if you know our product, you'll know that there's a core product which gives you your response costs first and foremost, loss to your business for the third-party claims, and rather loss to others for the third-party claims, loss to business for your business interruption claims. Part of the core coverage now is the enhanced multimedia, and that is available to everyone on every policy. The optional coverages I mentioned are still there. Contingent business interruption, I think we have a market-leading offer there. Cyber theft and tangible property as well. And joint venture and consortia, something perhaps not everyone needs, but if you need it, you need it. Now remember, there's one excess that applies across all sections, including the optional coverages. I'm not going to spend a whole lot more time. Jerry mentioned the press release. It came out yesterday. Check out our website. The policy and proposal are always available there, as well as a summary of key changes that will highlight the differences between the two forms. The LMI comparison is out, or I believe it should go out today, perhaps if it's not already, and you can already quote and bind on the broker portal. One last comment just about our enhanced appetite. You know, what good's a broad policy if you don't have a broad underwriting appetite to go with it? There are a few things that we don't do. Banks or generally deposit-taking institutions, so don't come to us with ANZ. Credit card issuers, investors, and doing their own account stuff. Stock, bond, commodity brokers or traders. We love insurance brokers. Insure a lot of those guys. Digital currency operations, also not interested in that. Adult content sites, nothing new there. And just as clarification, aviation risks and major utility service providers, gas, electric, and such, also not keen on those. But the other 13,000 plus, including gambling, gaming sites, dating sites, we can do those. We have done those. We are a market. Anything from startups to ASX companies. Jerry mentioned healthcare. We do retailers. We can do associations, groups, etc. I'm going to leave it right there. Give us a call if you think you've got something, if you're not sure. And let's go back to Jerry. Jerry, what else do you have for us today?
Thank you, Jeff. So what I'd like to do now is just talk about the capabilities on the portal side. As you know, you've got the ability to quote and bind risks 24/7. We have invested heavily in technology to provide you with a streamlined portal to access cyber quotes and bind cover. Some of the features of the portal, for those of you who don't know, is you can obtain quotes and bind business up to 75 million in revenue. As you heard from Jeff, Emergence now is one of the broadest appetites in the market with the ability to provide solutions for 13,000 occupations. And policy limits are available in the portal up to 10 million. And then as underwriters, we have the capability to write risks up to a policy limit of 20 million. Cyber theft cover has been majorly enhanced. Previously, there was a sub-limit in the portal for 50,000. That's now up to 250,000. And tangible property cover is now available up to 50,000. We've also listened to brokers about excess options, and now you have the ability to get excess options from $250 up to $25,000. And as underwriters, we've got the capability to build bespoke programs beyond that again. And as usual, the streamlined process of the renewal transaction makes renewing policies so much easier. The security behind the Emergence policy continues to be 100% Lloyd's. So as you can see, there's a lot of capability in the portal. If any brokers listening today require access to the system, please feel free to email info@emergenceinsurance.com.au and request access. Emergence are very focused on education and building the cyber knowledge of the industry, and in particular, our broker partners and their clients. Cyber is an emerging product which is going to change even further as we progress through the new mandatory reporting environment and deal with the issues ahead of us, including things like the Internet of Things. Going forward, we will continue our commitment to focus more on education through such things as webinars, website blogs, broker presentations, and LinkedIn content. We're also looking at other ways in which we can provide you with the tools to have a better cyber conversation with your clients. Thanks to your support, we're delighted to announce we have also opened a new office in Newcastle in New South Wales, and we are looking at expanding further across Australia. We'll keep you updated as our footprint grows. You can build your cyber knowledge by registering your email address on the products page of our website or follow Emergence Insurance on LinkedIn. Due to the continued support that we have got from brokers, our underwriting team also continues to expand. We have built the Emergence team with the addition of 2 new staff in the last quarter. Liam Wood has come on as an underwriter, and Luke Shepherd has come on as a portfolio analyst and on the actuarial side. For assistance on any cyber-related issues, please feel free to contact any of the growing Emergence underwriting team or our incident response team. Our incident response solution is managed from Sydney in partnership with Cunningham Lindsay. They understand the importance of immediately mitigating potential threats to your client's business. The Emergence Incident Response team is available 24/7 and manage the claims process to minimize the threat and save you time. The team includes IT investigators, forensic accountants, lawyers, public relations, and crisis management consultants. Every year, the Insurance Business Magazine does an online survey, Brokers on Underwriting Agencies. The survey is designed to identify the underwriting agencies who are best in class. Emergence have been humbled in winning the Product of the Year for 2 out of the last 3 years. So if you value the coverage, innovation, pricing, support, and education that we provide, we would appreciate if you put Emergence as your #1 pick in the best product category and the cyber and information technology section of the survey. We would very much appreciate your support. So as I mentioned earlier, we are running a competition to win a fantastic Google Home for any of you who follow Emergence Insurance on LinkedIn between now and next Tuesday, the 28th of August. We will advise the winner of the prize by email on Friday, the 31st of August. As I mentioned earlier, all attendees will be entitled to 1 CPD point. We will automatically send out the certificates of attendance to the email address you used to register for this event. For those attendees listening as a group, such as in a boardroom, please send a list of attendees now, including full name and email address, to info@emergenceinsurance.com.au so we can issue the attendees with a certificate of attendance. A number of you have posted questions on the chat forum, so let's deal with as many of those as we can. So what have we got?
Pretty quiet on the Q&A front, so if you've got any, please send them through. We get a lot of questions around the difference between cyber theft and social engineering, so I thought I'd touch base on that. There's a clear distinction between both, and social engineering is often where someone's targeted by a con or a scheme, or tricked into doing something that they don't want to do, or in other words, being manipulated to do something. Social engineering is not hacking. Hacking involves the use of computer technologies to gain unauthorized access into systems and networks. Whereas cyber theft is the loss of funds as a result of someone hacking into your system. So there's clear distinction between one and the other. Cyber policies cover cyber theft. It's our view that crime policies should cover those social engineering losses as a result of theft, fraud, or deception.
Okay, what other questions do we have?
Would subrogation of cyber theft due to negligence be covered under the main policy or the cyber theft extension?
Jeff, I'll hand that one over to you.
Well, if you're going to subrogate under the policy, the insurer assumes then the insured's rights against another party. Then now, if there's no loss under the policy, then there's not something to under the policy to subrogate. Cyber theft is can have a lot of different causes, and if you have the cyber theft extension, there may be a PI or a crime policy involved. There may be other factors or parties involved where subrogation could come into play. But I think you stand in the insured's position to the extent that the policy has applied. What else we got there?
I don't think companies understand that these risks are actually present to them until it happens. I think detailed case studies are a great way to educate.
Yeah, it's very much true. The reality for some companies is until they are faced with these issues, that they don't deal with them. I think Jeff Falstone made the point today is you really do need to prepare for these things, because a lot of the brand damage that's occurring will be through social media, and the speed in which that occurs is now lightning speed. So when you look at the underwriting questions that we ask when we're underwriting risks, we ask the question about being prepared for data breaches. And the reason for that is the better a company is prepared, the better that outcome is going to be. So we're huge advocates of clients understanding what their risk is, understanding what the crown jewels of the organization are, and plan for dealing with an attack. And one of the important elements of that is making sure you understand who is part of that incident response team. So it will invariably involve the CEO, it'll involve the IT service provider if there is one. The CEO is obviously a critical element of it. The insurance broker needs to be part of that because the insurance broker has placed a cyber program, and everybody needs to understand what they need to do. So not only are you dealing with the cyber breach, but you don't want to be having to plan the whole process as well. If you've got a playbook that you can work to, you can just systematically go through and deal with all the issues that are already in the plan.
There's another one here. What is the process response if a client lodges a cyber claim? Does Emergence provide investigation team support? So our incident response is based here in Sydney. It's 24/7. It's horses for courses. So if a claim comes through, and one of the questions that we ask is, does the client have an IT provider? If they do, we ask them who they are, and more often than not, we allow the local IT provider to respond in that instance, where it goes all the way to a far-ranging breach. We have a team of experts that will put in there to help respond to that. And in a few cases that have happened where the local team have tried to remediate, we've had our experts jump on the phone and try to nut a solution together.
Yeah, I think a lot of data breaches revolve around their particular issues. Some cases can be dealt with like that remotely. Some need on-site involvement. So it really depends on what is the circumstances of each particular case. You know, the benefit from our perspective is we structure things based on what's required for that particular client. So if it's an on-site issue, that can be dealt with, or if it can be dealt with more efficiently remotely, then we can do that as well.
Yeah. Would an advertising company benefit from a cyber policy? I think any company that's relying on data would benefit from a cyber policy, particularly some of the claims that we've paid. Which leads to the next one, example around triggering the cyber theft component of the policy. So we've had a couple of these claims come through. One that immediately comes to mind is a client was handling the back office for one of their clients. The junior in the office was making, I think, 7 or 8 payments, punched in all the details. They went on to the manager for approval. And what happened in the meantime was that someone had gone in there and changed the bank account details. So when it went to the manager for approval, all they do is look at who they're paying and how much. They don't check the bank account details, hit approve. And it wasn't until 2, 3, 4 weeks down the track when people were starting to chase up the funds that they actually found out that something was amiss. And that's when we went in there and had a look at the log files, etc., and found that someone had hacked in and changed details.
And that's a classic example of the importance of policies and procedures. You know, if you've got the right procedures in place where the manager's job is not only to check the name, but it's also to check the account numbers and the BSBs.
I think you just comment on one comment in there about the cyber theft, whether the bank wouldn't just return the funds. And actually, we've seen cases where that has happened. You know, cyber theft can be complicated and actually requires, special investigation, preservation of evidence, and so forth. Sometimes the bank has returned, and sometimes they're able to stop payment, but generally speaking, they don't. This isn't like the old days where you had a bank teller that would, double check things and make sure that it went right. Some of the electronic banking systems were not necessarily intended for direct consumer use, but they're being used that way. It happens very quickly. Often the bank cannot return the funds. It's gone from one bank account to another offshore, and very hard to trace.
Thanks, Jeff. Before we sign off today, I want to leave you with a couple of visuals of the challenge we all face when dealing with people as our last line of defense. So I promised we would finish at 60 minutes. We're now at 3 o'clock. On behalf of Emergence and Fallstone Communications, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join our webinar today. I hope you found it educational and useful in building your own cyber knowledge and giving you the tools to assist in having a more informed cyber conversation with your clients. We are recording our webinar today and will send those of you who have registered for today's event a link in the near future so you can share it with any other staff who are not able to tune in today. We will also send you a short survey to gain your feedback on today's webinar and to get your thoughts on what cyber-related topics you would like to see in future webinars. We would really appreciate if you could complete the survey and return it in the next few days. We will use your feedback to plan our webinars for the remainder of 2018 and into 2019. The next webinar in our series will be in November, so keep an eye out for that. We will send invites out a few weeks beforehand. This is the official end of the webinar for those of you who wish to leave. For those of you who wish to stay online to listen to our feedback on other questions logged by your colleagues, please feel free to stay online. So let's see what other questions there are. There was one topic on password management and why is it important? Passwords are a very critical issue because it is one of the entry points that criminals use to get into systems. The cyber attacks tend to be multi-layered these days, where they might start with a phishing email, and then once they get some malware into the system, then they use to infiltrate the system, gain access to passwords, and work their way through the system from there. So passwords are a gatekeeper to the business and therefore critically important. One of our IT forensic partners was sharing some insights into us recently, where they said if your password was 7 digits long, it would take them about 2 seconds to crack it by what they call a brute force attack. If the password is 8 digits long, it'll take them about 20 minutes. If the password is 10 digits long, it'll take them about 2 years. And for passwords that are 16 digits long, it'll take them about 25 years. So it just gives you an insight as to the importance of having good passwords. The trend these days is to move from passwords into more like passphrases, where it means something to you as a phrase, like, I come from Ireland. So that is a passphrase.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's one of life's struggles. But it's 16 characters long and therefore will be very difficult to crack. It looks like a jumble of letters when you put it in a line, but it's very, very hard to break. So think about your passwords, think about the length of your passwords, and don't use the same password for multiple applications, because that's just a recipe for disaster.
One just here from James. Is the Brisbane phone number the correct number to use to notify a new claim for one of our mutual insureds? No, it's not. Our claim number is the correct number to do that, and we're just getting it for you. It's 1300 799 562.
There was a scenario in here that someone described where they're hit by apparently a ransomware, locked out of the system. Luckily they encrypt all their data. They were able to restore from backups, and the next day they're on their way conducting business again. Of question is, do you have a notifiable data breach? Well, you certainly have a cyber event that's happened. What you don't know in that case is whether any data has been exfiltrated. And that's really what matters. I think if it's not been exfiltrated, then, well, you wouldn't have a leak or a breach. You have a security breach, but you don't have the data's not been out in the wild now. So the advantage of encrypting is that it's likely then that there's no imminent harm. I think you would still want to check your systems for any file exfiltration, and you would want to make sure that whatever was sensitive was certainly encrypted, so that you've classified and secured your data properly to mitigate then most likely the need to go through notification. But you need to go through the process.
Thanks, Jeff. There's a very good question here. Are private handheld devices used for work purposes covered? If so, how do you go about protecting these devices? What about home computers, desktops that have access to systems? So, very good question, simply because it is one of those areas in the cyber market where different insurers have different approaches as to what's covered under a cyber policy. So Jeff was talking about the Emergence wording, where we provide cover for IT infrastructure. And that says that it covers those systems that are owned, leased, rented, and most importantly these days, in a cloud environment, software that's licensed. But our definition goes on further and says devices that are used to carry on the business of the insured. And Emergence's view, which is not always shared by some other wordings in the market, is that if a BYO device, as Jeff mentioned earlier, which could be a mobile phone or it could be a desktop at home, if those devices are being used to access the insured systems, maybe through a VPN connection or through the web, and the home computer or mobile phone has been used to check work emails, well, then our approach at Emergence is that device is being used to carry on the business of the insured, and therefore that is a cyber event covered under our policy.
Yeah, we won't reconstruct your holiday pictures, but it's just exactly as Jerry explained. If it's being used for the business purposes, to the extent that it is part of your IT infrastructure, yes, it's there, and yes, it is hard to secure. There are fewer security products. It's a less secure environment. There are other stats out there I won't go into now, but about I mentioned the phishing, that it's more likely to be successful on mobile devices. You don't have some of the same security features. The screens are smaller, so they're just not built in there. And there's just a heap of malware out there for Android devices and tablets. So it's a tough security problem. Yeah.
So just to take that concept and bring it a bit further, if you've got scenarios which your clients will have, which is you're using public Wi-Fi, God forgive that you even do it. But if you're using public Wi-Fi or you're using hotel Wi-Fi, if those systems are being used to carry on the business of the insured for responding to emails, well, then that all comes within the gambit of the Emergence policy as well.
There was one in here around, do we know of any fines and penalties that have been handed down? So there's been no fines and penalties to our understanding rendered on either individuals or companies within the within the NDB scheme over the last 6 months. But we continue to sit and watch with bated breath.
Yeah, when you listen to the OAIC, their focus at the moment is heavily on education. The notifiable data breaches scheme is an important development for businesses and for data breach notifications. So the OAIC are trying to hold businesses' hand through this process and help them to comply with the obligations. So it's very much a case of educate, educate, educate at this point in time. That will change at some point. We don't know when, where the commissioner will use their powers, and only one of those powers is fines. One of the other powers they have is enforceable undertakings, to push a client down a compliance route rather than actually fining them. So I think we've covered most of the questions. So thanks a million for your time. Thanks again for joining us. We hope that the webinar has been informative, and I hope you enjoyed the Q&A session. On behalf of the Emergence team, goodbye and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.